There's nothing more aggravating than dealing with someone whose ego has spiraled out of control. And when a woman's ego is towering over everything, it becomes a power struggle you didn't ask for. It's exhausting, constant self-praise, an unwillingness to admit fault, and an expectation that the world revolves around her every whim. No one wants to be caught in the endless web of her arrogance. And the bigger issue is how unchecked egos can destroy relationships, shatter communication, and make mutual respect feel like an impossible goal. Now let's be clear, this isn't about tearing down someone's confidence. Confidence is a powerful, beautiful thing when it's rooted in self-respect and humility. But when confidence turns into arrogance, you're no longer dealing with a balanced person. You're dealing with someone who thinks they're entitled to more than others, whose opinions are gospel, and whose mistakes are never really theirs. It's a one-way conversation, a constant game of mental gymnastics where you end up questioning yourself while she stands on a pedestal. So, how do you reduce that ego to zero? You call it out. You cut through the nonsense and confront her with the facts she's been avoiding. This isn't about being polite or sugarcoating things. When someone's ego is that inflated, they're not going to respond to gentle nudges or passive hints. You need to confront the issue head-on, making it clear that the world doesn't revolve around them, and that relationships, whether romantic, professional, or friendly, require equality and balance. You highlight the inconsistency between their actions and the reality around them, showing how their overblown sense of self is pushing others away. And yes, sometimes it needs to be harsh. Sometimes, the only way to deflate an ego is to hit it hard with reality. That's not cruelty, that's clarity. It's about helping them see how their behavior impacts others, how their relentless self-importance is suffocating the people around them. Reducing a woman's ego to zero means giving her no room to hide behind excuses or justifications. It means stripping away the layers of entitlement and bringing her back to a place of mutual respect. 1. Confront her superiority complex. If a woman walks around acting like she's better than everyone else, it's time to bring that superiority complex crashing down. Too many people tiptoe around inflated egos, afraid to call them out, but the longer you let that go unchecked, the worse it gets. She needs to know, loud and clear, that her self-perception as being above everyone else is just that, perception, not reality. Start by pointing out the arrogance in her behavior. Call her out on the constant need to prove she's better, smarter, more attractive, or more capable than anyone else in the room. Make it clear that her inflated sense of self is not impressive. It's obnoxious. The more direct you are, the less room she has to hide behind her ego. Bring up specific moments where her superiority complex became unbearable, whether it was the way she shut down others' opinions or how she constantly took the spotlight. The next step? Refuse to feed into her delusions. Stop giving her the validation she craves, whether it's through compliments or going along with her attempts to prove she's always right. She feeds off attention, so cut off that supply. If she tries to assert her dominance in a conversation or situation, don't let her win by default. Challenge her, directly and publicly. If her ideas or claims are faulty, don't just disagree, prove her wrong in front of others. The more she's exposed in social settings, the quicker her superiority complex will deflate. This kind of confrontation forces her to come face to face with the fact that she's not invincible. And don't be afraid to hit where it hurts. If she's overconfident about a certain area of her life, whether it's her looks, career, or social status, question it. Ask her what makes her think she's superior and watch as the facade cracks. Often, a superiority complex is built on insecurity, and once you expose the lack of substance behind it, the ego collapses. This approach may be harsh, but it's necessary when someone refuses to self-reflect. A superiority complex is not just annoying, it's toxic. Confronting it head-on is the only way to put a stop to the behavior before it gets out of control. You're doing her a favor, really, by forcing her to take a long, hard look at herself. Only then can she start to see the truth. 2. Challenge her opinions publicly. One of the quickest ways to deflate a woman's ego is to challenge her opinions, especially in public. Many women with inflated egos believe their opinions are untouchable, as if their word is law and no one else's input matters. If she thrives on this, the solution is simple. You need to knock her off that pedestal by questioning her ideas, openly and unapologetically. For example, imagine you're in a group discussion and she's talking as though her perspective is the only valid one. Interrupt that flow of superiority by presenting an opposing view. Don't just disagree quietly. Speak up in front of others. Ask her to explain her reasoning in detail, And when she stumbles or oversimplifies her argument, point it out. The aim is not just to disagree, but to show that her ideas aren't flawless, and she isn't always the smartest person in the room. This kind of public challenge makes her second-guess herself, because her ego thrives on the illusion that no one dares to oppose her. But here's the key. Don't make it a private conversation. When you challenge her publicly, you introduce the pressure of social scrutiny. Her ego feeds off the approval of others, and when people start questioning her ideas, that approval vanishes. For instance, if she always positions herself as the expert in a work meeting, challenge her suggestions and offer alternatives. Make it clear to everyone in the room that she doesn't hold the final say. The more people see her opinions being dismantled, the less her ego will have to cling to. Imagine you're in a social setting, and she's sharing an opinion that's just off base or overly confident. Rather than letting it slide, bring facts or logic into the discussion to dismantle her stance. If she tries to brush it off or talk over you, keep pushing. The key is persistence. She might try to save face by doubling down, but the more public and undeniable the challenge, the less control she has over the narrative. Remember, her ego depends on others seeing her as authoritative. By confronting her in front of an audience, you shatter that illusion. Eventually, she'll realize that her opinions, no matter how much she dresses them up, aren't immune to criticism. This forces her to rethink how she presents herself and, more importantly, how much of her identity is tied to being right. 3. Highlight her flaws relentlessly. No one is perfect, but when someone's ego gets out of control, they seem to forget that simple fact. A woman with an inflated ego will often act as though she's flawless, as though her mistakes either don't exist or don't matter. To bring her back down to earth, you need to make sure she's constantly reminded of her shortcomings. This isn't about being cruel for the sake of cruelty. It's about forcing her to confront the reality that she isn't above criticism. Everyone has flaws, but the problem with an overconfident woman is that she'll either ignore them or try to bury them under layers of self-praise. This is where you come in. Call her out when she slips up. Whether it's a small mistake or a glaring flaw in her character, don't let it slide. When someone has built an ego fortress around themselves, they rely on others ignoring their faults to maintain the illusion of perfection. The moment you start pointing out the cracks, the entire facade begins to crumble. You can relate to this. Everyone knows that one person who seems to think they walk on water, only for them to trip over their own feet when no one's watching. It's infuriating to deal with someone who refuses to acknowledge their faults while holding everyone else to impossible standards. That's why you need to highlight every mistake, every contradiction in her actions, and every imperfection in her character. The more you make her flaws obvious, the less room she has to pretend she's better than everyone else. And don't just stop at the surface-level flaws. Go deeper. If she's acting like her career, appearance, or social standing is flawless, start questioning those as well. Show her that even the areas she prides herself on aren't above criticism. The goal here isn't to destroy her self-esteem, but to strip away the layers of arrogance that have built up over time. When her ego is challenged on every front, she's forced to reassess how she presents herself to the world. By constantly bringing her flaws to the forefront, you chip away at the inflated version of herself she's created. Eventually, she'll have no choice but to face the fact that she's just like everyone else, imperfect, human, and prone to failure. And once she starts realizing that, her ego will have nowhere left to hide. 4. Withhold validation and attention. One of the most effective ways to reduce a woman's ego is to stop validating her every move. It's astonishing how many men fall into the trap of constantly praising women, even when that praise is undeserved. This endless supply of validation only fuels her ego and reinforces the idea that she can do no wrong. If you want her to come back down to earth, it's time for men to wake up and stop being enablers. Think about it. How often do we find ourselves complimenting a woman's every little achievement, even if it's just showing up? This practice can create a dangerous illusion of superiority. By withholding that validation, you challenge her to seek approval from within rather than relying on the admiration of others. When she realizes that the applause isn't guaranteed, she may start to reflect on her actions instead of expecting constant affirmation. It's not just about being harsh or withholding compliments for the sake of it. It's about fostering genuine self-worth. Men need to be mindful of how often they elevate women's egos without recognizing their flaws. This isn't about tearing someone down. It's about encouraging self-awareness and authenticity. By stepping back and refusing to shower her with attention, you send a clear message. Her value isn't tied to how others see her. This shift can be uncomfortable, but it's necessary. It forces her to look in the mirror and confront the reality that she might not be the queen of the universe she thinks she is. If her self-esteem relies solely on external validation, then that foundation is incredibly shaky. Withholding attention makes her rethink the source of her confidence and, ultimately, her self-image. Men need to realize that constant praise isn't a requirement of healthy relationships. It's time to stop being the backup singers in her one-woman show and instead encourage her to embrace her flaws and face her shortcomings. When you refuse to play into the role of her cheerleader, you give her the opportunity to become self-reliant. In the end, this isn't about dismantling her self-worth. It's about helping her build it on a sturdier foundation. When validation and attention are no longer freely given, she'll be forced to question why she believes she deserves it in the first place. That realization is what truly brings an inflated ego down a notch, making way for growth and genuine self-acceptance. 5. Force her to acknowledge failures. In a world where everyone is eager to sugarcoat the truth, confronting a woman about her failures can feel like a radical act. But it's necessary, especially when she's wrapped up in an ego that blinds her to her shortcomings. The reality is that no one is infallible, yet some women act as if they're immune to failure, strutting around with a false sense of invincibility. It's time to strip that away and force her to reckon with the truth. Start by pointing out specific instances where she fell short. This isn't about humiliating her, it's about holding her accountable. For too long, many have allowed her to brush off her failures as inconsequential or blame external factors. Challenge that narrative. When she tries to sidestep responsibility, don't let her get away with it. Remind her that personal growth comes from acknowledging where she's gone wrong and learning from it. Without this reflection, she'll remain stagnant, caught in a cycle of arrogance. Men, too, often contribute to this cycle by enabling her refusal to accept responsibility. They back her up, allowing her to deflect criticism instead of urging her to take a hard look at her actions. It's time for men to wake up and realize that allowing her to escape accountability doesn't do her any favors. By calling her out, you help her develop a stronger, more realistic sense of self. The process might be uncomfortable, but it's crucial. You might say something like, "You didn't handle that situation well. Why do you think that is?" This question forces her to dig deep and reflect on her decisions. It pushes her to confront not just her failures, but also the feelings of inadequacy that may lie beneath her ego. Acknowledging failure is a vital step towards growth and maturity. Moreover, by highlighting her failures, you challenge her to reassess her self-image. If she believes she's always right or above making mistakes, a reality check can be a rude awakening. It forces her to realize that her ego doesn't define her worth. Instead, it's the ability to acknowledge flaws and learn from them that truly builds character. Ultimately, forcing her to confront her failures can be the catalyst for genuine self-improvement. The more she grapples with the reality of her imperfections, the more her inflated ego will deflate. It's not about tearing her down, it's about giving her the opportunity to rebuild herself, stronger, wiser, and more grounded. Only then can she truly step into a version of herself that isn't overshadowed by an overblown sense of superiority. At the end of the day, an inflated ego is a barrier to growth, and it's up to us to tear it down, ruthlessly if needed. Here's the harsh truth. If she can't handle being brought back to reality, then maybe her ego wasn't the problem. It's the fact that she's too fragile to face the truth. The real weakness is hiding behind a false sense of superiority. Share your experiences in the comments below. I want to hear how you've handled inflated egos, and I'll be reaching out. Together, we'll dig deeper into what people refuse to admit. Thanks as always for watching, and always remember to keep embracing a stoic approach to life.